What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then it's just welcome to my channel. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you will not be disappointed. You guys, I don't know why I'm giving Morticia Adams today. I have been messing with the lighting for like 20 minutes trying to fix this, but it just won't fix. And so here I am giving the Adams family values. And it's okay because it's gonna have to be, okay? You guys, today's video is gonna be a rather long one. And I have honestly been dreading filming this because I just knew it was gonna take forever and a day to film and edit. Thought about doing 2 parts, but I don't want to do that either. So here we are, for I don't know how long. In today's video, we are going to discuss the horrible Michael Swango. Have you heard of him? If not, you'll be familiar with him by the end of this very lengthy video. And so without further ado, I don't want to waste too much time talking. Let's just get right into the story. Because child, I'm filming this really late at night and mama needs to go to sleep. So Michael Swango was born in Tacoma, Washington on October 21st of 1954, making him a Libra. He was almost a Scorpio, and I'm so glad that he's not, because we don't need the L's right now. And he was born the middle child of Muriel and John Swango. Now, he grew up a military brat, moving around at least 15 times throughout his childhood. But by his teen years, his family relocates to Quincy, Illinois permanently. His father serves in the U.S. Army as an officer, and unfortunately, after returning home from the Vietnam War, he falls into a very deep depression and becomes very dependent upon alcoholic beverages. Now, this leads his wife Muriel to eventually divorce him because she was not down for any of the things. And John does not see the children that often after this. Child, this low-key sounds like my childhood, quiet as it's kept so far. Michael becomes really close with his mother after his parents split. He attends Quincy Catholic Boys High School, where he participates in band, does extremely well academically, and graduates as valedictorian of his 1972 class. And after graduation, he enrolls into, I believe it's pronounced Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, on a full music scholarship where he maintains really good grades for the first 2 years, and he even gets himself a little girlfriend. He begins dating one of his fellow classmates. But after his sophomore year, the young lady breaks up with him. He is heartbroken. He falls into a very deep depression. His grades slip, and he also becomes very reclusive. Did not want to be around anybody, did not want to be seen or heard or bothered or any of the things. Ultimately, he decides to just leave school and join the Marines, but this does not work out for him either. He doesn't really like it. He receives an honorable discharge, but maybe the military was a good break for him, because when he returns home, he goes back into school and is performing exceptionally well academically, like he had been doing prior to his little breakup. But Michael has also formulated this strange, weird obsession with death. He begins collecting newspaper articles, magazine clippings, anything that was covering or discussing a tragedy or any kind of violent crime, and he keeps them inside this notebook, kind of like a scrapbook. He finishes school this time, graduating summa cum laude and receiving an American Chemical Society award from his school as well. After graduation, he goes off to medical school. Yes, another one of them. He attends Southern University School of Medicine, and while he is an undeniably brilliant student, he also exhibits some behaviors that are undeniably strange. Now, he prefers to work as an ambulance attendant over his regular studies, which that's not necessarily the strange part. The strange part is that he displays a very unusual interest in patients who are crossing over to the other side. Another something that sort of went unnoticed at the time was the fact that many of his assigned patients suffer from random life-threatening emergencies, with at least 5 of them dying. And at the time, no one really suspects a thing. Meanwhile, Michael is becoming less focused in his studies, lazy, and only a month before he is scheduled to graduate, he is caught faking checkups during his OBGYN rotation. At the time, a unanimous vote is required in order to dismiss a student, and luckily for him, just one member of the committee votes to give him a second chance, saving him from being kicked out altogether. Now, despite the school still having questions and concerns regarding his competence, they do allow him to graduate 1 year after his class on one condition. He is to repeat the OBGYN rotation, and various other extra assignments that they piled onto him as sort of like a punishment. Now, he of course agrees to these terms and does go on to graduate, but he does, however, receive a poor evaluation in his dean letter from SIU, but this does not stop him from getting a surgical internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. During this internship, nurses begin to notice that seemingly healthy patients began dying mysteriously at alarming rates. With every instance, Michael had been the floor intern. Still, no one suspected that there was any foul play until one of the nurses actually catches him injecting medicine into one of the patients, who coincidentally becomes very ill shortly after. When the patient gets sick, the nurse is not convinced that this is at all a coincidence, and so she goes to the admin team to let them know what she had seen and how she suspects that Michael had something to do with this. But instead of it being investigated, she is actually met with accusations of paranoia. Then on January 14th of 1984, a 19-year-old gymnast, Cynthia McGee, is at Ohio State University Medical Center recovering from severe but not life-threatening injuries after being hit by a car while riding her bike. Michael had gone in to draw her blood, and almost immediately afterward, she develops a fever of 102 degrees. Just hours later, shortly after midnight, Cynthia codes and doctors rush to her bedside to try to assist, only to find that it is too late to save her, and Cynthia unfortunately passes away. An autopsy is done and her COD is determined to have been cardiac arrest. Just 1 week later, 21-year-old Richard DeLong is admitted at the hospital. He too is in stable condition before he receives a visit from the same intern doctor, who just so happened to also be present at the same time of his passing. And right after Richard's passing, like immediately afterward, his wife had received a phone call from this same little intern doctor letting her know that her husband had unfortunately suffered cardiac arrest. Now, his wife requests an autopsy be done, but one is not performed because the intern does not submit the paperwork for one. Now, had the autopsy been performed as the wife had requested, the medical examiner would have discovered right away that Richard had actually suffocated after someone at the hospital had placed a ball of gauze into his throat, constricting his airway. Now, later down the line, he was exhumed and this was found, but unfortunately, the discovery came a little too late, and Michael had continued his reign of silent terror throughout the hospital wings in which he worked. The very next day, an elderly patient by the name of Ruth is talking to a nurse after being admitted nearly 2 weeks prior after hitting her head at home. Now, Michael enters the room and tells the nurse that he needs to give Ruth a checkup and asks the nurse to step out, which she obliges, of course. About 20 minutes later, the nurse returns to Ruth's room so that they can finish their little conversation, only to find Miss Ruth passed out and unconscious. The nurse, of course, immediately calls for help, and the staff is completely perplexed as to what could have caused Ruth to pass out. But luckily, they are able to stabilize her, and she is completely fine. 3 days after this, a nurse at the hospital enters the room of 43-year-old patient Wayne Walter, who is being treated for a brain tumor. Now, as the nurse enters the room and approaches the bed, she realizes that Walter is gasping for air. Then he begins turning blue from the lack of oxygen. Just as quickly as she had noticed, and before she can take any sort of action, the patient flatlines. And just 10 minutes prior to this, guess who had been seen inside of Wayne's room? Michael. 4 more days go by, and then Ruth, the elderly lady that was found passed out in her room, she experiences yet another episode where they find her unconscious, but unfortunately this time they are unable to revive her. Now, at this point, the hospital staff is very concerned about how many patients they are losing in this particular wing. Yet no one suspects Michael's involvement, and all of these sudden, unexplained deaths remain a mystery. That is until the nurses realize that Michael just so happened to be on the floor every single time one of the patients coded. Now at this point, they decided to take their report made by the one nurse a little bit more seriously. Then days later, on February 7th, a little bit after 9 p.m., Michael enters a room being shared by two patients. He inserts a syringe into one, and literally within seconds, this patient stops breathing. Now, the second patient, who has witnessed all of this, begins to scream for help, and the hospital staff comes rushing into the room to see what was going on. The patient that he got the opportunity to inject is alive, but is paralyzed and unable to breathe on her own for about 30 minutes. Meanwhile, as the staff had come rushing in to see what was going on, Michael had slid out of the room and down the hall into an empty room. But a nurse had seen him, spotted him sliding out, and decided to go inside the room to see if it was anything suspicious that he had left behind or anything out of place or any clues. I might have said it was a nurse. It was a nurse's aide. The nurse's aide goes into the empty room, takes a look around, and spots a syringe in the sink. They give the syringe to the nurse in charge of the floor, and also, of course, tells them that they had seen Michael slide in there and slide out, and they were sure that he had placed it there. Now, Michael is, of course, questioned about this and everything else that is going on in the hospital, and he denies any wrongdoing whatsoever. Child, he claims that he is also a victim himself, because he is obviously now the target of a witch hunt. Now, they were not trying to hear it. They placed him on probation pending the outcome of the investigation. And surprisingly, after weeks of investigating, no further evidence is found suggesting that Michael had committed any type of foul play. He is fully exonerated. He returns to work, claiming to be the victim of a smear campaign. And they even reassign him to a different wing in the hospital so he can continue his residency in peace, without the girls whispering in the halls behind him or looking over his shoulder. But it is not long before a new wave of deaths once again have everyone baffled and completely on edge, wondering what is going on. Like something must be up. 3 patients mysteriously pass away with no medical explanation whatsoever, at least not one that was obvious to them, and the hospital administration becomes desperate for answers, because if word spread to the public about this, there would surely be a lot of panic and a lot of questions that they cannot answer. So at this point, they decide to take a second look at Michael, and also decide to conduct an annual review of Michael, and this time they investigate a little bit deeper. They also notify the police of their suspicions as well. Now, upon his review, his supervisor rates him as poor, and he is subsequently relieved of his duties and given a pink slip. The hospital is completely satisfied with this, and they are confident that their problem is completely solved. After being fired, he returns home to Quincy, Illinois, and lands himself a job as an EMT. Michael's new co-workers immediately label him as odd. Very odd. And there are quite a few things that led them to this conclusion about their new co-worker. For one, Michael tells the team that his ultimate fantasy is to be called to the scene of a horrific school bus accident. He also speaks very openly and freely and very often about how much he admires serial killers, especially ones who had evaded arrest for a long period of time. And these were the kind of things that made them a little uneasy in the presence of Miss Michael. Now, a few of them felt like he just had a dark sense of humor and used that as like a coping mechanism for things that he saw on the job. But most of everyone else was like, yeah, no, he is definitely not dealing with a full deck of cards. Now, within months of being employed as a paramedic, a breakout of mysterious illnesses occur at the rescue squad headquarters where Michael is now working. It all begins when 4 members of his rescue squad are hanging out in the crew lounge at the hospital when Michael walks in with a dozen donuts. Little box of donuts, little box of Krispy Kreme. Very typical at a job, you know, for somebody to bring donuts for the staff, right? They eat the donuts, and within an hour or so, each of them become very sick. All 4 of them are experiencing dizziness, nausea. They are also vomiting, and all 4 of them go over to the ER to get checked out. And at first, none of them could really tell like what was going on, but it was kind of strange that all 4 of them have come down with the same symptoms at the same time. And so with a little bit more thinking, they pinpointed back to Michael and those damn donuts. Instead of confronting him about it or reporting it to law enforcement, they decide to do a little experiment and handle this on their own. One night, they fake an emergency call and then call for Michael, who was chilling in the lounge. Now, as soon as Michael leaves the lounge, they go through his things and they are horrified at what they find inside of his bag. Ant poisoning that contains arsenic. Now, at this point, they still do not report anything. They have a whole plan of their own and they are here to see it through. They wait a couple of days and they stage a container, a pitcher of unsweetened tea inside of the employee lounge. And they, of course, expect Michael to try to tamper with it and, do one of these with some of his little ant poisoning or something. They leave the pitcher sitting in there for a couple of hours. Later on in the day, one of those brave souls, because I wouldn't have been the one to volunteer to do this, taste the tea that they left behind. Mind you, it was unsweetened. And he notices that it tastes extremely sweet now. They take the tea, put it in a little container to have it tested at a lab, and the results revealed that it is in fact laced with arsenic. Now at this point, they decide to escalate everything down to the police station. Michael receives a call at work telling him to get down to the police station pronto, and upon his arrival, he is immediately arrested with 7 counts of battery, 1 count for each poisoning. Now, the police don't stop there. They obtain a search warrant for his home, and inside they find a number of weapons, syringes, chemical compounds, and recipes for even more chemicals. There is also a book called The Poor Man's James Bond, which allegedly gives tips on how to get away with the murder. Now, his court date is set for April of 1985, and at his trial, he is adamant that he was not guilty of any of the things that he was accused of. He claims that the only reason he had the ant poisoning in the first place is because there was an infestation in his little apartment. Now, of course, they have to go check this out. And when they do, they find that he does, in fact, have an infestation of ants. But what they also find out is that the red ants that were infesting his apartment were not native to the state of Illinois at all. So unless they were there visiting their cousins from out of town, child, it was very obvious that Michael had planted them there himself. His trial concludes and he is found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His application for a license to practice medicine in Illinois is voided. Just 2 years after he had gone to prison, he is released for good behavior. He had got himself a little girlfriend because love after lockup, love during lockup, all of that is a thing. And when he is released, he and his girlfriend decide to leave Illinois and move to Virginia so that they can have a fresh start at life in a new place where, nobody knew Michael's reputation and his history. Now they settle down and 2 years later they get married and things are going normally and good. That is until Michael gets tired of the at-home husband life. Being a family man, being at home and a newlywed was really cute for the first 2 years. But as the time progressed, he became more and more eager to get back into the medical field. He spends the next 3 years constantly applying for a job at different hospitals all around the country with no luck of getting hired because he, of course, had to explain that little time in jail, which that apparently is not very cute for a doctor. Even though he wasn't even telling the truth, he had made up this whole completely different false story about these battery charges, saying that they were the result of a bar fight that wasn't his fault in the first place. He'd even forged several documents supporting this fabricated story, but not many people believed him, and it did not take much digging for them to find out that he was actually lying about the story and what he actually was in prison for. And so, yeah, no one was trying to hire Michael. Eventually, Rita grows tired of his fascination and obsession with getting back into the medical field, despite all of these doors being closed in his face, and she decides to just leave him and go back to Illinois. This still does not convince Michael to give up his dream of getting back into the field, okay? Instead, he decides to run a little bit faster from his past, pick up the pace a little bit by changing his name to Daniel J. Adams. And from there, he continues to apply at different hospitals. Newly single, he becomes really closely acquainted with a young 26-year-old nurse by the name of Kristen. And the two of them fall madly in love with each other really quickly. Kristen might have been smitten by, what's his name now? Daniel. but not many others were, because her family and her friends did not like him at all. And they are very concerned that their relationship is moving way too fast and she has not allowed enough time to actually truly get to know this man. But Kristen does not listen to any of their warnings. She feels like she loves Michael Daniel and he is her man and she is going to stick beside him. So they're just going to have to deal with it. Anytime anyone tries to warn her against him or express any type of concern, she wastes no time shutting it down and letting them know, like, he is here to stay. You're going to have to accept it or no longer have me a part of your life. And her dedication to him and loyalty is something that Michael really appreciates and admires. And so he decides to propose to Kristen and she accepts without hesitation. In her eyes, her life with the man that she loves is unfolding better than she could have even imagined. Not long after the engagement, Michael is finally accepted into a residency program in South Dakota in May of 1992. Things seem to really be falling into place for the newly engaged couple. They relocate to South Dakota so he can, go there and work. And in addition to his residency, he also applies for membership to the American Medical Association. Now they process his little application. They also run his background. When they run that little background check, all of his skeletons come popping out of the closet. They are able to uncover not only the poisoning of his old co-workers, but also the suspicions surrounding his involvement of all these mysterious deaths where he began his first residency. And child, not only do they deny his application, they also contact the hospital in South Dakota that he had just started working at and let them know all of the things that were going on. And of course, they decide that they no longer want him either. But this isn't even the worst of it, because Kristen had no clue that any of this was in his background, because she don't really know him like that. And so all of this is exposed to her as well. And when she finds out, she is shocked and appalled, and she realizes that her friends and her family were right. She had no idea who this man really was. Now she expresses to him that this is a huge red flag, and at this point she is having second thoughts about their entire relationship, feeling like she doesn't even know the man she is about to marry. Now Michael was very fearful that Kristen was about to just walk out of his life, and he was not prepared to just let that happen. But instead of making a big fuss about it or even begging her to stay, he just plays it cool, silently deciding that her simply walking out of his life was not about to be an option. Now, Kristen is one who keeps a journal, and in it, she details instances where she would suddenly experience like blurred vision. She also complains about persistent nausea and decides that it is best for her to just leave the house that she shares with Michael and return home to her parents' house, which she does by just deciding to up and leave one day. Now, Michael does not let any of this stop him from getting his little arms back in one of those white coats, okay? He applies for residency at the NYU Stony Brook Medical Center, sending falsified letters of recommendation, hyping up his skills. And it pays off because they do offer him a spot. He shares the good news with Kristen and he pleads for her to come back to him, like give him another chance, give their love another try. And initially, she is hesitant because it wasn't just about him losing his job. He was obviously a deranged little man, accused of some pretty heinous things. But eventually, she does give in and she begins to see Michael again. And shortly afterwards, she begins suffering from these horrible migraines. Now, Michael tells Kristen that he has a plan, that he will go ahead and travel to NYU, get settled in, and then send for her to move there permanently to be with him. But for now, they'll continue to see each other when they can. July 1st of 1993 rolls around and it is his first day on the job. Almost immediately, patients begin dying mysteriously, with the first instance occurring literally the morning after Michael's first day. Now, this patient had been admitted to the hospital with lung congestion and was stable, resting comfortably, when suddenly he becomes paralytic. He then falls into a coma and subsequently passes away. 4 more patients follow a similar pattern, being stable, experiencing a random onset of paralysis, then heart failure, and of course, the loss of life. All while Michael is on duty. But initially, the only connection that they make between these patients isn't even that. It's just the fact that all of this occurs at night. Now, while Michael is up to no good in New York, Kristen is down in Virginia with her parents, completely unraveling. She's become depressed. She is now suffering from anxiety. It has been 4 months since she's seen Michael, but they do keep constant communication over the phone, and Michael has yet to give her a solid date for when she is to move to New York to be with him. Every time they talk about it, he has an excuse or reason as to why now is not the right time for him to join her there, which was really weird to her because he was the one that reached out to her and initiated them rekindling their romance. And now he is obviously not making it a priority. It just was not making sense to her. Her emotional and mental state continued to deteriorate. And when she wakes up one morning to find that Michael has actually emptied out her bank account, she becomes furious and she has one last conversation with him. Now, I don't know what the conversation was about. I'm assuming it was her confronting him or at least questioning him about the money. But we only know that they spoke via her call logs because not long after having this conversation with Michael, she is admitted to a psychiatric hospital after she is found walking down the street completely naked in her parents' neighborhood, speaking incoherently. Now, she is held for a short time, and after she is released, she drives to a park and sadly ends her life. Now, because the obvious COD, the coroner does not check her for any type of poisoning or anything like that. Her mother asked for a lock of her hair just as a keepsake, and she waits a little bit, but then she decides to have the hair tested. And when she does, it is discovered that Kristen had high levels of arsenic in her body. Her mother has no doubt that Michael is behind this, and she is determined to get justice for her daughter because she is sure that had he not been dosing her, she would not have had these issues that ultimately led her to do what she did to herself, right? And the mother's first order of business is reaching out to his current hospital where he works and informing him of his shady past, everything that Kristen had told her that had come out about him, including the fact that her daughter has now been found with the same chemical in her system that he had used on his coworkers. As a result, they waste no time. They fire him. Mama does not stop there. She then reaches out to the press to further expose him, telling them every little unflattering fact that she knows about the man. And also, of course, how she suspects that he has caused her daughter's untimely demise. Now, not only is this not a good look for Michael himself, it's also not a good look for the hospital that had hired him. Even though they had let him go, they had hired him in the first place without doing a thorough background check. And they had also believed all of his falsified documents were real. The 2 doctors that were responsible for hiring him both resigned, but one of them just didn't resign and go. He takes his time to go out and mail 10,000 letters to 10,000 different medical institutions across the U.S., warning them about Michael and all of his shenanigans. This also leads Michael to pop up on the FBI's radar, and they issue a warrant for his arrest, suspecting that not only had he committed fraud, but he had also been out here killing folks. Which of course he has, but they're a little too late because by the time the ink dries on the warrant, Michael Swango has left the United States and relocated in Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, none of the 10,000 letters had crossed any of the 7 seas, child, and so they had no idea that Michael was up to anything. Michael has no issue securing a job at a hospital there, and the staff, of course, has no idea of his horrible background. And with his charming personality, there are no signs of him being a deranged maniac. Not only are they impressed with his personality, they are impressed with all of these fake credentials that he done typed up for himself. Just like at every other hospital that he had joined, immediately after him being hired, they began losing patients unexpectedly on Michael's watch, but it is an entire 7 months before they begin to even suspect that he has anything to do with it, believing that it is surely not a coincidence that all of this is happening on his watch. They fire him. However, Michael insists that he is in fact innocent. And this time he does not just take his firing and go. He decides to file a wrongful termination suit against the hospital. He is represented by one of the country's most prestigious human rights lawyers who claims that his client is just a victim of malicious rumors and professional jealousy, and ultimately they win his lawsuit. They had to give him some money. I saw one article, I believe, said it was $8,000, but I couldn't really confirm that was the amount that he had won. I would think he would win a lot more than that. I don't know. They give him some money, but they don't give him his job back. He's not worried about this though, because the nearby hospital has a shortage of doctors and is in desperate need of some help. And Michael sees this as the perfect next step in his career. Now he goes to them and volunteers to work for free, pro bono. Little do they know, Michael might not be being paid, but he is in fact benefiting from his time there, feeding his little sinister thirst. Patients are becoming violently ill and are suddenly passing away shortly after his visit with them. And it is people with simple illnesses or people who were on the road to recovery and hadn't shown any signs of regression at all. Now, one red flag that should have kind of told them something was up is that Michael insisted on doing his rounds by himself. And this is not really typical at all, but they allowed him to do so because they were desperate for the help. Unfortunately, this gives him the perfect opportunity to be alone with the patient, making it super easy for him to carry out his antics. Another red flag is the amount of prescriptions he was prescribing to all of the people. It wouldn't just be one or two medications, it would be multiple. They were excessive. Rarely did he ever just give one. He also has a stash of chemicals in his home in the fridge. And while he would carry out his ward rounds by himself, he would also carry syringes filled with these concoctions in his pockets. One night he visits the room of a 56-year-old patient who had suffered sores on his toes that resulted in him having his foot removed. Now all had gone well and he had practically healed up. He was only there waiting on his prosthetic. The patient is awakened from his sleep when he feels someone pulling down his pajama pants. It is Dr. Mike with the syringe in hand, and he does not say a word. He just injects the patient and quickly sticks the empty syringe back into his jacket pocket. He then waves goodbye at the patient and walks out of the room, still without saying a word. Now, the patient doesn't think much of it. He just attempts to go back to sleep, but before he can even doze off, his entire body goes numb. Realizing that he is unable to move, he of course begins to panic, and then his breathing becomes really labored. But even with that, he manages to muster up enough energy to call for help. One of the nurses rushes in to his side to see what is wrong, and he tells her what had happened. Michael is called and he is questioned about the ordeal, but he vehemently denies that any of the things had happened. He even goes so far as to gaslight the staff, telling them that he had gone through this before at the previous hospital, the one that he had to sue, and he does not understand why people keep attacking him like this. Now, even though he is denying that any of this occurred, an empty syringe cap is found underneath the patient's bed. However, the staff insists that there is nothing that they can really do. Luckily, the patient survives, but he does suffer further complications on down the line as a result of whatever Michael had injected him with. And despite losing more patients under similar and mysterious circumstances, he continues his employment at this hospital for the next year. Now, over this time, the nurses have become increasingly suspicious of Michael, who they have also now grown to dislike a lot, mostly because of his bad hygiene and the fact that he wore the same blue corduroys day after day. Now, over the year, they had also attempted to alert their superiors about these suspicions, but nothing ever came of the reports. Then one night, a woman in the maternity ward begins screaming to the top of her lungs, moments after Michael was seen hovering over her head. When they speak with her, she claims that Michael had injected something into her IV drip. Now, he initially insists that she must have been hallucinating because none of that had happened. He then contradicts this by saying, yes, he was messing with her IV bag, but He was just trying to flush it out. The woman breaks into a sweat and suffers severe vomiting, but she does live to deliver a healthy baby. Now, this incident forces the hospital's hand after ignoring a whole year of allegations against this man in an effort to avoid unnecessary panic. And they finally decide to relieve him of his duties. And so for the 106th time, Michael is fired. Michael been fired more than anybody I know. Local newspapers publish articles about Michael and all of the things that he was accused of. In the articles, they also had statements from people who had worked there at the hospital with him. And so not only is Michael fired, but a whole police investigation ensues. When they carry out the search of his home, over 55 different medicines are found inside his home, like he had his own pharmacy, all of which he had brought into the country illegally. When they ask him about this, he says, and I quote, "I thought I had come to a jungle and out of the goodness of my heart had brought medicine." After speaking with them, he skips town and finds shelter with Lynette O'Hare after being introduced to her by a member of her daughter's church group that he had joined. Because now he was into the church. Now, she and her daughter had believed him to be innocent of the allegations after speaking with him. Because, of course, he claimed that he was innocent and made himself out to be this victim. And the timing was perfect because Lynette's daughter was about to move to the UK and had been praying for God to send a nice person to come and live with her mother and keep her company now that she would no longer be there. Instead, she gets Michael. April of 1996, he moves into Lynette's 3-bedroom house with her and instantly locks himself away inside of his room. Not only does he lock the door, he draws the curtains and he has very little contact with anyone for the next 5 weeks. During this time, Lynette never lays her eyes on him. Breakfast will be left outside of his door and she never sees him open the door and get it, but she would just notice later on that the food would be gone from in front of the door, and then hours after that, empty dishes would be left outside of his door to be collected. Instead of fearing Michael, she feared for him. She worried about him like a mother would a child, and she makes several attempts to try to coax him out of his room, none of which worked. She really feels for him, believing that all of these allegations had destroyed him. And finally, randomly after 5 long weeks, he emerges from his room ready to be seen and heard, but not to keep Lynette company or to stop being strange. He needs to borrow Lynette's car. And this becomes a habit. Day after day, he would disappear in her car for hours. And unbeknownst to Lynette, he was out being real social because he found himself a girlfriend. Now, the borrowing of the car becomes more and more frequent. Yes, my brush is broken. And it is not long before that and other factors lead Lynette to view Michael in a different light. More and more food begins to disappear from her refrigerator. She has now received her monthly payment for bed and breakfast that they had agreed upon. And if that is not bad enough, her liquor has been run through. Then she receives her electricity bill and it has quadrupled since Michael has began living with her. Mind you, he's not trying to give her any kind of money, so of course this is a problem. All of these things are beginning to annoy her. And now that Michael is being a little bit more social, she is beginning to see his true colors. He very often excitedly speaks about Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, how much he admires them and looks up to them, and how they were so smart and evaded police for so long, how no one suspected that they were the monsters that they were. And Lynette just thought this was weird. Lynette also has domestic workers who come to her house and do various tasks like cleaning or gardening, just different things like that. And one day while Michael is away, the housekeeper calls for Lynette to come into his room because there is something that she should see. In his drawer, he has stale sandwiches made of like leftover breakfast that he was keeping there as if he planned to still eat, which was weird. But not only that, he is hoarding newspaper clippings from tragedies and all of these different articles about other criminals. He had a whole bunch of clippings from the OJ trial, books on poison, and to top it all off, a stolen pair of her daughter's underwear. Now at this point, he could very well be guilty of all the things that he was accused of. All of the allegations just might be true. In an effort to feel more comfortable in her home, she asked her 2 employees to move into the home with them. Now they work inside the home, so they're not entirely oblivious to Michael's behavior. And they actually agreed to move in with her just, as a safety measure to keep her comfortable in her home. And I know you saying she should have kicked him out. She should have. I agree. They move into the home and make a terrifying observation. Michael sometimes creeps out of his room in the middle of the night to stare at her through the crack of her bedroom door. We could only speculate the thoughts that ran through his mind, and I'm sure they are not good. But they bring this to her attention, and they moved in to bring her some peace, child. But with this new information, she is even more unsettled. He also begins stealing money from her, and not only her, but her house guests as well. And even still, she is leery about asking him to leave. But when she mysteriously falls ill and gets really sick, fearing that her life was now in danger, she steps up and tells Michael that he needs to go. He does not try to contest her decision. He does not ask her why. He simply gathers his things and he leaves. 2 days later, Lynette begins having car trouble. And when the mechanic looks at her car, he finds that her gas tank is full of sugar, more than 2 kilograms of sugar. She makes a police report, and then she hires a guard to watch over her in her home for the next 2 months. August of 1996 rolls around, and Michael has now moved into the home of this girl that he had began dating when he was staying with Lynette. So he is now living with her and her 2 small children. Now he is already on the police radar for the hospital deaths, but then they go to speak to him about the sugar. He is questioned. He of course denies having any involvement, but fearing that the walls are now closing in on him, he flees the country. An international manhunt ensues for Michael Swango, and he seemingly disappears off the face of the earth, at least for a little while, because one thing we know about Michael, he has the need to cruise hospital hallways. And so the following year, June of 1997, he resurfaces when he applies for a job as a doctor, of course, and he is hired in Saudi Arabia. Now, the catch is, in order to begin his job, he has to get a work visa. And this means he would have to travel back to the US. June 27th of 1997, he boards a plane to bring his behind back over here. And it never crosses his little mind that maybe his passport information has been flagged by now. Like, that is never a thought, right? And as soon as his crusty little feet touch Chicago soil, he is snatched up and placed under arrest. Do you believe the federal government does not have enough evidence to charge him with killing anyone? However, they do have enough evidence to charge him with fraud, and so they get him on that. They had all his little copies of his fraudulent documents, fake letters of recommendation that he had used in order to obtain employment, and there was really no way that he could deny that or get out of this. So he was pretty much stuck. He pleads guilty to the fraud charges, and he is sentenced to the maximum amount of prison time for his offense, 3.5 years. And those 3 years go by super fast for him. And he was ready to walk out of those prison doors. And on July 11th of 2000, just 1 week prior to his scheduled release date, he is charged in the deaths of 3 of his Virginia patients. Now, he thought that they had given up the pursuit of him once he had gone to jail for his fraud. And I don't know why he thought that. And you know who else hadn't given up on him? The Zimbabwe officials. Honey, they basically tell the U.S. to hold him down so they can get a few licks in too. They hit him with an additional 5 charges for patients there, plus poisoning 7 more patients who had actually lived. So on July 17th of the year 2000, Michael is indicted in federal court. Now, at first he pleads not guilty and maintains his innocence to the charges he received from the United States. However, realizing that he faces the death penalty over here and over in Zimbabwe, he decides that it's probably best that he just go ahead and enter a guilty plea and just get life over here in the US. The last thing he wanted was to go to jail and do any time over in Zimbabwe. So he and his lawyer worked out a deal with the US where he will receive life in prison without the possibility of parole. Never, no chance of getting out. This will guarantee that he will never get out of the US jail, and so he will never have to step foot in a Zimbabwe prison. And to this day, Michael Swango remains incarcerated at a supermax prison down in Florence, Colorado. Child, just ugly. Anyway, no one knows exactly how many victims he has. Not even him. And this video is already long enough, but I'm gonna get this story time off because I really have to tell y'all about this. Imagine me doing the research on this story, how he was going about sticking people with needles, right? As soon as I finished the research on this case, I myself got sick. I fell ill. I was feeling really bad. And so I go to the doctor, right? They take my blood pressure and it is 166/108. Like extremely high, and they're freaking out. They're like, this is almost stroke level. You have to relax. Like, we have to get your blood pressure down. This is very serious. And I'm just like, okay. But then they tell me that they would also need to take a vial of my blood and give me a B12 shot. Do you know how much I freaked out at that point? Like, how am I supposed to calm down? I have read about this man for days and how he was pricking people with death needles, and now you tell me you got to prick me twice and I'm supposed to calm down now? Like, how is that supposed to happen? How am I supposed to calm down now? How? I'm trying to be rational here and like, girl, you know, you go to the doctor, like, relax. But then again, it's like, girl, this a new doctor. We don't know him like that. He could be up to anything. We see what Michael was up to. Needless to say, I was there for a while. My blood pressure did not go down for a while. I ended up being moved to another room so I can listen to spa music and drink water. Child, it was a lot. But the guy who was assisting me, like, he was great because he came in there to do some breathing exercises with me, and I'm like, girl, you know what's going on. Like, you didn't told me to take my mask off. You didn't took your mask off. Now one of us can get each other sick. I appreciate the help, but it's like we kind of risking a lot here. We're risking a lot. But ultimately, all of the things we tried did eventually help. I would say probably like after maybe 45 minutes, I was able to calm down enough to where it was safe to draw my blood and give me the shot and then take my behind home. But that was stressful, honestly. I feel like if I hadn't just researched this story, maybe it wouldn't have been so, you know, I don't know. Ooh, I have one more thing to show y'all before I get out of here, and it is the cutest thing ever. Y'all know the satin robe is Mother's signature over here on this channel. Hold on. This is not the cutest, most perfect little thing. Look at my daughter. Girl, stop that now. It is so cute. And she is so cute in it. I just love it. Now I be trying to wear my little red one all the time. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I had to get it. I just love it so much. It is the cutest thing ever. And honestly, it's about one little milk bone from being too small. So hopefully I can find her another one. Girl, hi, look at you. You look so nice. Oh, it's just so cute. All right, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the look. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to give my video a thumbs up before you leave if you did. Share the video with a friend. Leave your thoughts down below and let me know what you think. As always, and of course, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace. I don't know why I'm giving Morticia Adams today. I have been fondling. Yeah, that's probably not the best word. Fondling the lights. I really think this dark hair is what's messing up my lighting. Maybe not. Now I gotta put the damn hair back on. Alright, so Michael Swango was born on, okay, I already said that. This is just, oh my goodness. Dun 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 dun. 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 Very much giving Morticia, and I'm pissed about it. Now this I was about to say Norse. But unfortunately, now Michael enters the room and tells the nurse. The nurse, of course, immediately calls for help. Jesus, I can't talk. I guess technically that's right though. Now they decide to take their report. This also leads Michael to pop up on the FBI's radar, and they issue an arrest I was gonna say an arrest for his warrant for free, pro bono. Okay, does pro bono only work for the lawyers? Or is that like just a term meaning for free? I gotta stop asking these dumb questions out loud. She has not received her monthly payment for bread and breakfast. Bread and breakfast. Child. At least for a little while, because one thing we know about John, who is John? Who is John in this story, girl? Michael is indicted in the federal court. What? Let me not say that. That might sound like I got a STD.